Machiavelli discovered that the most dangerous people aren't those who refuse to help. They're those who help everyone. In The Prince, he documented how being universally useful makes you universally disposable, and why the people who serve everyone end up serving no one, including themselves. What I call the utility trap, when your willingness to be helpful becomes the very thing that destroys your power, was a pattern Machiavelli observed in political leaders who tried to please every advisor, ally, and citizen, and inevitably lost control of their kingdoms. Today, I'll show you Machiavelli's exact method for strategic usefulness, and why he believed that saying no to most people transforms you into someone they can't afford to lose. The case that revealed Machiavelli's most dangerous insight began with his observations of Cesare Borgia, whom he studied extensively between 1502 and 1503. Borgia had inherited a reputation for strategic ruthlessness, yet Machiavelli witnessed something unexpected that would reshape his understanding of power dynamics. During a crucial period in Borgia's campaign, Machiavelli documented how the prince began accommodating every request from his generals, advisors, and local leaders. He granted favors freely, said yes to conflicting demands, and tried to maintain his usefulness to everyone in his expanding territory. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince who attempts to serve all masters serves none effectively. I observed Borgia's power diminish not through his cruelties, but through his indiscriminate generosity." Within months, Borgia's allies began making increasingly unreasonable demands. His generals expected immediate compliance with their requests. Local leaders assumed his resources were unlimited. Former enemies who had sworn loyalty suddenly felt entitled to his continuous support. Machiavelli realized he wasn't witnessing political strategy. He was observing what happens when someone becomes so useful to everyone that they lose the ability to be truly valuable to anyone. The pattern Machiavelli documented would become one of his most important insights. Universal utility creates universal expendability. Machiavelli's observations of utility dynamics led him to identify what modern psychology now understands as resource devaluation theory. When something becomes too readily available, its perceived value decreases exponentially. Building on Machiavelli's insights about power and value, what I call the availability paradox shows how making yourself perpetually accessible makes yourself perpetually undervalued. This reflects Machiavelli's understanding that rarity creates respect. What Machiavelli understood intuitively, behavioral economics, has now proven scientifically. Dr. Dan Ariely's research on scarcity and value perception validates Machiavelli's early observations. When resources, including human assistance, are abundant and easily accessible, people unconsciously devalue them. From studying Machiavelli's work, I've identified what I call the service spiral. Capable people help because they can. Others request more help because the first request was fulfilled. The helpful person says yes again to maintain relationships. The cycle accelerates until the helper becomes trapped in a system of endless obligation. The person caught in this spiral experiences what I term the burden of indispensability, being so useful to so many that they lose all personal agency. They become servants to their own competence. What's even more disturbing, based on patterns that emerge from Machiavelli's observations, people who become universally useful often do so from a place of insecurity rather than generosity. They believe their value comes from what they can do for others, not from who they are inherently. This creates what I call the fundamental utility paradox. Machiavelli's most disturbing discovery about universal usefulness was what I call the ingratitude principle, the psychological mechanism by which helping everyone guarantees appreciation from no one. Through his diplomatic observations, Machiavelli documented a consistent pattern. The more someone helped others, the less grateful those people became. His insights about human nature reveal that people judge benefits not by their magnitude, but by their expectation. This wasn't cynicism, it was psychological observation. Machiavelli recognized that human nature includes what modern psychology calls hedonic adaptation. People quickly adjust to new levels of service and support, making yesterday's extraordinary help today's minimum expectation. Even more disturbing, what I call the resentment reversal shows how people often develop hostility toward those who help them extensively. As Machiavelli understood, excessive help creates psychological burden in the recipients. The universally helpful person creates what I term the obligation anxiety in others. They feel indebted, which triggers unconscious resentment. People prefer to feel competent and independent. When someone makes themselves too useful, they inadvertently make others feel inadequate. Machiavelli's observations of political alliances reveal how generous acts toward allies could eventually turn them into enemies. Gratitude transforms into guilt, guilt into discomfort, and discomfort into hostility toward the source of their dependence. This reveals the dark truth about unlimited usefulness. It doesn't create loyalty, it creates resentment in those who benefit from it. Through studying various political figures from Machiavelli's era and applying his insights to modern situations, I've identified 4 distinct patterns of how competent people destroy their own power through indiscriminate usefulness. Type 1. The resource provider. Machiavelli observed leaders who defined themselves through their ability to solve everyone's material problems. These individuals became human ATMs, always expected to provide money, connections, or resources whenever anyone asked. What I call the treasury trap reflects Machiavelli's understanding that those who open their resources to all find themselves controlled by their own generosity rather than empowered by it. Type 2. The problem solver. These individuals became trapped by their intellectual competence. Following patterns Machiavelli identified, capable advisors who couldn't resist fixing every problem presented to them eventually became overwhelmed by others' constant crises. What I term the competence curse shows how people who solve all problems become responsible for all problems until others cease thinking altogether. Type 3. The emotional absorber. Building on Machiavelli's insights about human nature, I've observed people who make themselves available for everyone's emotional needs, listening to complaints, mediating conflicts, providing comfort during every difficulty. What I call the empathy exhaustion happens when someone becomes the repository for everyone's troubles, expected to transform emotional lead into gold. Type 4. The time giver. The most dangerous type, reflecting Machiavelli's understanding of power dynamics, involves those who couldn't say no to requests for their time. They attend every meeting, accept every social obligation, and make themselves available whenever anyone wants access. What I call the accessibility trap demonstrates how time given without consideration of value teaches others that one's time has no value. Understanding your specific pattern is crucial, because each type requires different strategies for what I call the reclamation of strategic value. Machiavelli identified 3 specific dangers that made universal usefulness a threat to both personal power and effective leadership. Danger 1. The competence trap. Machiavelli observed that highly capable people often fall into what he called the curse of ability. Their competence becomes their prison, because others learn to depend on their skills rather than developing their own. He wrote, "The prince who does what others can learn to do prevents others from learning." Soon he finds himself surrounded by incompetence of his own creation, yet blamed for their incompetence. This creates organizational weakness disguised as personal indispensability. Danger 2. Decision fatigue and strategic blindness. Machiavelli documented how leaders who said yes to everything eventually lost the ability to distinguish between important and trivial requests. Their judgment became compromised by the sheer volume of decisions they'd agreed to make for others. The prince who decides all matters great and small soon finds he cannot decide anything well. His mind becomes cluttered with the trivial concerns of others, leaving no space for strategic thought. This explains why universally helpful people often feel overwhelmed and unable to focus on their own priorities. Danger 3. The resentment reversal. Most dangerously, Machiavelli found that universal usefulness eventually creates the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of building loyalty and appreciation, it generates resentment and entitlement. He observed, "The greatest enemies are often those who have been helped the most. They resent their dependence and seek to destroy the evidence of their own inadequacy by destroying those who exposed it." This is why some of the most generous, helpful people end up surrounded by ungrateful, demanding individuals who blame them for the very problems they helped solve. Machiavelli's insights about power dynamics led me to develop what I call the principle of calculated unavailability, a systematic approach to being useful strategically rather than universally. Phase 1. Value assessment and categorization. Drawing from Machiavelli's approach to political alliances, I recommend that before agreeing to help anyone, a strategic person must assess both the value of the relationship and the cost of the assistance. What I call the utility calculation reflects Machiavelli's understanding that effective leaders consider not only what they can do, but what they should do. Technique. Following Machiavelli's strategic thinking, I suggest creating 3 categories of people. Strategic allies whose success directly benefits your objectives. Neutral parties whose requests should be evaluated case by case. Resource drains who take without reciprocating or advancing mutual goals. Phase 2. The scarcity creation protocol. Machiavelli understood that rarity increases value. What I call manufactured scarcity for strategic advantage applies his insight that what is easily obtained is lightly valued. This means saying no to good opportunities in order to save your capacity for excellent ones. Machiavelli's observations show that leaders who help selectively are appreciated more than those who help universally. Phase 3. The reciprocity requirement. The final phase involves what I term mutual benefit enforcement, ensuring that your usefulness creates obligations rather than dependencies, following Machiavelli's understanding of strategic relationships. This doesn't mean being transactional, but ensuring that helpful acts create mutual value rather than one-sided depletion, which aligns with Machiavelli's approach to sustainable alliances. Machiavelli's observations extended beyond individual cases to include both successful and failed applications of strategic usefulness principles. The case of Lorenzo de' Medici, strategic political navigation. Machiavelli extensively studied Lorenzo the Magnificent, whose diplomatic success demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking. Lorenzo's ability to maintain power in Florence reflected his understanding that effective leadership requires careful allocation of resources and attention. What I find most instructive about Lorenzo's approach is how he seemed to understand that power lies not in serving all, but in being valuable to the right people. His diplomatic success came from strategic relationship building rather than universal accommodation. The case of Pope Alexander VI, the accommodation problem. Machiavelli observed how Rodrigo Borgia, Alexander VI, fell into what I call the accommodation problem, pleasing everyone trap, despite his political sophistication. Alexander attempted to maintain usefulness to conflicting factions within the church and Italian politics. What I see in Alexander's approach is the danger of trying to serve competing interests simultaneously. This creates chaos rather than stability, as Machiavelli noted in his analysis of fractured political alliances. Machiavelli's own strategic application. Most significantly, Machiavelli applied strategic thinking in his diplomatic career. His letters reveal how he learned to be strategically available to powerful figures while maintaining boundaries with those who would drain his resources without reciprocating. What I call strategic resource stewardship reflects how Machiavelli learned to guard his assistants as carefully as a merchant guards valuable goods, understanding that rarity creates reverence while abundance breeds contempt. Machiavelli emphasized that strategic usefulness requires building relationships with others who understand and practice similar principles, what he called the alliance of the strategically valuable. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince who practices strategic assistance must surround himself with others who understand that value comes from discretion, not from availability, to all who ask." Type 1. Fellow strategic thinkers. Machiavelli identified individuals who naturally understood the principle of selective usefulness. These people don't take advantage of generous offers and don't make unreasonable demands on others' time and resources. These relationships are characterized by mutual respect for boundaries, appreciation for help when it's given, and understanding that valuable assistance requires careful consideration. Type 2. Reciprocal contributors. Machiavelli observed that the best relationships involve people who contribute as much as they receive. They bring value to interactions rather than simply extracting it. Machiavelli wrote, "The alliance between givers who also receive creates strength that benefits all parties. Each feels valued rather than used." Type 3. Quality over quantity. Appreciators. Machiavelli identified people who prefer meaningful, occasional assistance over constant, superficial help. They understand that strategic support is more valuable than unlimited availability. Recognition indicators. Machiavelli developed specific signs for identifying people worth your strategic investment. They express genuine gratitude rather than treating help as expected. They offer reciprocal value without being asked. They respect your time and boundaries without taking it personally. They understand when you say no and don't pressure you to change your mind. They demonstrate strategic thinking in their own decisions. The relationship building process. Machiavelli taught a careful approach to building these valuable connections. Begin by observing how they treat others' time and resources. Notice whether they contribute to relationships or only extract from them. Test their response to small boundaries before establishing larger ones. Assess whether they appreciate quality assistance or demand constant availability. Gradually increase investment based on demonstrated reciprocity. Machiavelli emphasized, "The goal is not to find people who never ask for help, but to find people who understand that valuable help requires thoughtful consideration." Machiavelli viewed strategic selectivity as essential not just for personal power, but for creating systems where competent people can contribute effectively without being consumed by others' demands. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince who protects his capacity to help ensures he can help when help is most needed. The prince who depletes himself through indiscriminate service serves no one when crisis arrives." The 4 stages of strategic transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without guilt. The first transformation occurs when you acknowledge that unlimited helpfulness actually diminishes your ability to provide meaningful assistance. Machiavelli called this conscious resource stewardship. Machiavelli observed, "Wisdom begins with understanding that the capacity to help is finite, and finite resources require strategic allocation." Stage 2. Boundary implementation without isolation. The second stage involves establishing limits on your availability while maintaining meaningful connections. Machiavelli called this selective engagement. He noted, "The strategic prince learns to say no to good requests in order to say yes to excellent opportunities. This serves the greater good by ensuring resources flow to their highest purposes." Stage 3. Value creation through scarcity. The third transformation happens when your selective assistance becomes more appreciated than your previous unlimited availability. Machiavelli called this enhanced utility through restraint. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince who helps fewer people with greater intention creates more gratitude than the prince who helps everyone with diminished capacity." Stage 4. Strategic impact without burnout. The final stage involves what Machiavelli called sustainable influence, using your capabilities to create lasting positive change without depleting yourself. Machiavelli observed, "The prince who preserves his strength can provide strength when others falter. Strategic conservation enables strategic deployment. The integration creates systemic change." Machiavelli believed that people who practice strategic usefulness serve a vital function. They model sustainable helping while encouraging others to develop their own capabilities. Machiavelli wrote, "When the capable refuse to do what others can learn to do, they force others to grow. This serves the collective by strengthening all parties rather than weakening the helper." Machiavelli documented specific dangers that can derail the transition from universal utility to strategic selectivity. Pitfall 1. The guilt manipulation. Machiavelli observed that when helpful people begin setting boundaries, others often escalate their emotional appeals. He called this the desperation intensification. He warned, "Those accustomed to unlimited access will not yield gracefully to limitation. They will deploy guilt, anger, and urgency to restore their previous advantages." Machiavelli noted that the most manipulative responses often come from those who have benefited most from unlimited assistance. Pitfall 2. The perfectionist trap. Machiavelli documented cases where strategic people tried to help everyone perfectly rather than helping selectively. They exhausted themselves trying to manage the transition without disappointing anyone. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince who attempts to please all during the transition pleases none and defeats his own purpose. Some disappointment is the inevitable cost of strategic improvement." Pitfall 3. The isolation overcorrection. Machiavelli observed that some people, upon recognizing the utility trap, swing too far toward complete unavailability. They become so protective of their resources that they miss genuine opportunities for valuable connection. He noted, "The prince who helps no one serves no purpose. Strategic selectivity requires discernment, not universal refusal." Pitfall 4. The inconsistency problem. Machiavelli warned that people attempting strategic selectivity often apply their boundaries inconsistently, saying yes to some requests they should refuse, while saying no to others they should accept. Machiavelli emphasized, "Clear principles create clear boundaries. The prince who applies his standards arbitrarily confuses others and undermines his own objectives." The maintenance practices. Machiavelli developed ongoing approaches for sustaining strategic usefulness. Regular assessment of where your time and energy are flowing. Consistent application of your helping criteria, regardless of emotional pressure. Connection with others who support your strategic approach. Recognition that some relationships may not survive your new boundaries. Focus on the increased quality of help you can provide when not overwhelmed. Machiavelli wrote, "The strategic prince accepts that being useful to some requires being unavailable to others. This choice serves the greater good by ensuring excellence rather than mediocrity." Machiavelli understood strategic selectivity within the context of creating stronger, more capable communities where people develop their own competencies rather than depending on others to solve their problems. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince who does for others what they can do for themselves weakens the state by creating dependence. The prince who helps others become capable strengthens the state by multiplying competence." The historical pattern. Machiavelli observed that societies flourish when capable individuals use their abilities strategically rather than indiscriminately. This forces others to develop skills and take responsibility rather than remaining dependent. Machiavelli noted, "What appears first as refusal to help later manifests as encouragement for self-reliance." the strategic withholding of assistance often provides the greatest assistance of all. Modern applications. Machiavelli's principles apply directly to contemporary situations. Leaders who solve every problem prevent their teams from developing problem-solving capabilities. Parents who do everything for their children prevent the development of independence. Friends who always provide emotional support without boundaries can enable dysfunction rather than growth. Professionals who accept every request become less effective at their core responsibilities. The service through selectivity. Machiavelli's crucial insight was that strategic usefulness serves others better than unlimited availability. By helping selectively, you ensure your assistance is meaningful and sustainable. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince serves his people best, not by doing everything they ask, but by doing what most benefits their long-term strength and independence." The ultimate integration. At the highest level, Machiavelli observed, strategic selectivity becomes natural wisdom rather than calculated withholding. You develop intuitive discernment about when helping serves everyone's interests and when it undermines them. Machiavelli called this the transcendent utility, the ability to help others in ways that strengthen rather than weaken both parties. Remember Cesare Borgia, the Prince Machiavelli observed falling into the utility trap through indiscriminate helpfulness. After studying Machiavelli's writings, subsequent leaders learned to apply strategic selectivity principles. History shows that leaders who mastered strategic usefulness, like Lorenzo de' Medici, created more lasting positive change than those who tried to help everyone. They preserved their capacity for meaningful assistance by refusing to deplete themselves through trivial requests. Most importantly, they discovered that saying no to many people made saying yes to the right people extraordinarily powerful. Machiavelli's insight proves timeless. The prince who serves everyone serves no one effectively. The prince who serves strategically serves everyone better than unlimited availability ever could. This represents Machiavelli's most practical discovery, that the people who create the most positive change are those who understand that their capacity to help is precious and must be protected through strategic selectivity. Your willingness to help everyone isn't generosity. It's often insecurity disguised as virtue. You're not being kind when you say yes to every request. You're being strategically ineffective. The question isn't whether people will ask for your help. The question is whether you'll develop the discernment to help strategically rather than indiscriminately. Machiavelli's selectivity method offers a path from depletion to sustainable impact, from being used to being valued, from universal service to strategic influence. You were born to make a difference, not to be everyone's solution to every problem, but to provide meaningful assistance where it can create lasting positive change. The world needs your capabilities, but it needs them applied with the strategic wisdom that multiplies impact. Your value doesn't come from being available to everyone. Your value comes from being strategically valuable to the right people at the right times for the right reasons. Learn Machiavelli's strategic selectivity principles, and you become exactly what he believed effective people were meant to be: sustainably helpful rather than constantly depleted, strategically valuable rather than universally taken for granted. Machiavelli's most practical discovery wasn't about political manipulation. It was about understanding that the people who help most effectively are those who help most strategically. The danger isn't in being less helpful. It's in being helpful without the discernment that makes help truly valuable. You are not meant to solve everyone's problems. You are meant to solve the right problems for the right people in ways that create strength rather than dependence. If you recognize yourself in Machiavelli's description of someone caught in the utility trap, you're part of a pattern that affects the most capable and generous people. Share in the comments which type of utility trap resonates with you. Your journey towards strategic selectivity connects with others learning the same principles. Subscribe for more insights into classical wisdom that transforms modern challenges. If you're ready to explore more of Machiavelli's insights about power dynamics that most people never understand, check out my video on how to become untouchable, Machiavelli's Psychology of Power, where I reveal the psychological principles that create unshakable personal authority and why true power comes from being strategically unavailable rather than universally accessible. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.